an attack on solidarity. Trade unions furious with Starmer for sacking Tarry as McDonnell backs calls for a general strike. So yeah, the main story, as far as I can see from the media about the Labour Party, is why, you know, Sam Tarry's been sacked from the shadow cabinet as a shadow minister, I think is more correct. And he's also spoken out about this and how we need to protect the link between the trade unions and the Labour Party. I've got lots of speakers coming up from the trade union movement, and I'm hoping that we will have some people to volunteer from the call who are Labour members. If you're a Labour member and you would like to speak about what's happened to Sam Tarry, please put your hand up and I'll come to you after I've spoken to the trade union representatives. He couldn't come on the call today, but I've got a quick interview that was made with Andy Kerr, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the CWU, who's not particularly known to be a firebrand left-wing union representative, but this is what he said in an interview.
What about Starmer? Do you think he made the right decision by sacking Sam?
No, and that's it's quite absolutely clear about that. There was no reason to sack him, and I don't accept his argument that it was because Sam Tarry made some statements on a picket line. Sam has been a member of the TSSA for a long number of years. In fact, he worked with the TSA for a number of years. Why wouldn't he support his fellow workers and friends and comrades in there? And I don't believe there's anything what Sam said in any of the interviews he gave that was wrong. I think he was standing up for the working class. He was standing up for his fellow trade union members, and I don't think there's anything to apologise for whatsoever. And I just think Keir Starmer and his leadership were completely wrong to have sacked. And if Keir doesn't understand that he needs to actually go out there and fight for the working class of this country, we were never going to get back in power. There's a great opportunity here with what the Tories have done over the last 2 or 3 years. This country's in total disarray. You know, if there was ever a need for a strong Labour leadership, it's now. And I believe that Keir has to stand up and support those workers, or he has to leave.
Joining us is Onay Kasab, firstly from Unite. Sharon Graham, we talked about that bit in the newspaper review, has spoken out about what Keir Starmer's done with Sam Tarry. What's your view on how detrimental that sacking is to the Labour Party's link with trade unions?
In the eyes of our members, it's hugely detrimental because it's yet another insult to the trade unions, to workers, to every worker who's taking strike action at the moment. And let's not forget, it's part of a pattern, isn't it? It follows the Lammy car crash interview that took place a little while ago, while almost sniggering and laughing, he said about how they couldn't support people on picket lines or support workers taking strike action. So yes, it's hugely detrimental, and crucially for us, it comes at the same time as the Tories are looking to launch attacks, or they're vying with each other to see which one can launch the most vicious attack against workers and trade unions. If you listen to Truss and Sunak, it's very clear they're looking to make ultimately strike action and maybe even trade unions illegal, listening to some of the rhetoric. So while that's going on at the same time, for Labour to be doing this is absolutely appalling. Our members will look at it and see it as a bit of a fratricidal fight, if you like, and start questioning the relevance of the Labour Party. It's not even fiddling while Rome burns. It smacks more of kicking the water buckets over so you can't put the fire out. It's absolutely appalling behaviour. We've got the cost of living crisis, while we've got the Tories attacking workers, and yet this is the response from the Labour Party. I think the reality is that for the bulk of our members, they will see, if they haven't seen it already, by the way, they will see the Labour Party is becoming increasingly irrelevant to their lives.
I mean, we spoke on an earlier show about the Coventry bin dispute, which is we've got Pete Randall coming on later after his son's football match. We're going to celebrate the victory there, but it was notable that it was a Labour council in Coventry that tried to push through cuts to pay, and also were using agency workers and trying to break a strike it cost about 3 or 4 million to try and break the strike. I mean, Keir Starmer didn't say anything about that. So it's not just a national issue, is it? It's a local issue. A lot of Labour councils are not supporting trade unions, are they?
You raise an excellent point. And on Coventry, let's not forget, when the dispute first happened, there's a television interview with Keir Starmer when he was asked about the industrial relations situation at Coventry, the impact on Labour councils and affiliation fees, and he sneered. He said the word Coventry and sneered and talked about a little sort of parochial dispute. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Coventry, in a small way, if you like, represents, and actually it's come from our members who have been on strike in Coventry. Coventry represents what Labour under Starmer would be like in government. Now look, the very, very good news is that on Friday we finally signed an agreement with regard to Coventry, and our members there have won a massive victory against a Labour council, a 12.9% pay increase, 8% increase for new starters, and a £4,000 payment for people who work over Christmas, and all the allegations against Pete Randall dropped. That didn't happen with any help from the Labour Party. That happened through our members taking strike action. But here's why our members see it as a Starmer government, if you like, in a localised way, because they would rather spend over £5 million trying to break the strike rather than negotiate with the unions. They brought in what was a scab strike-breaking organisation, a subsidiary of the council, as it is now, to try and break the strike. They victimised Pete, and there's a bit of a comparison there, isn't there, with people being disciplined and expelled from the Labour Party. They victimised our rep, Pete Randall. And just to put the cherry on the top of the cake, we signed the agreement on Friday. We agreed to hold off on any press releases until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, so we can at least go forward and say we've reached an agreement. I'm on the train coming home from Coventry, and I'll get a call from the director saying they're not going to abide by the agreement with regard to the media statement. A relatively small thing, if you like, but an indication of how they treat the trade unions. I think Coventry Labour are what you can see with a Starmer-led government. And our members in Coventry have now described the Labour Party and the Tories, and it's their language. They've described them as two cheeks from the same arse, and that's come from strikers who have been taking action against the Labour Council.
Right. Well, we could talk for much longer, but we've got Pete Randall on. We'll celebrate that later on. Thank you so much for coming on, Onay. And I'm going to move on to Andy Dark from the FBU, who's the Assistant General Secretary. Hi, Andy. Can you hear me?
I can. I hope you can hear me.
I can, yeah. Good to see you. Thank you for coming on. Now, we're just really trying to work out what the state of play is amongst all the affiliated trade unions. I mean, what do you feel about the effect of Starmer sacking Sam Tarry has been on the FBU and on your members? Do you feel less inclined to support Labour, or do you feel Labour's not got your back? I mean, I know. I think the FBU had a vote, didn't they, on disaffiliation earlier this year? But do you think that's at all likely?
Well, certainly, I mean, the history of the Fire Brigades Union, the Labour Party, goes back a long way. We were part of the initial unions that established the Labour Party in its current form way back when. We had a national pay dispute in 2002. Essentially ended, I suppose, 2004. There were some withered edges, but let's call it 2004. And our conference voted to disaffiliate, and we did. And we stayed disaffiliated right up until we saw some light in the tunnel with the, not so much just the election of Jeremy Corbyn, a single person, but the change within the Labour Party. And we took a vote as a conference. Our conference took the vote, not the Executive Council, but with the support and promoted by the Executive Council to re-affiliate. You're absolutely correct. In May this year, there were motions to the conference calling for disaffiliation. The Executive Council did not support them. And that still is the position of the Executive Council, is that clearly the Labour Party can change. It's changing, or it has changed for the worst. That's the zag we're on now. We have to work for the zig to get us back onto a decent course. Is that it's not so much these things need to be looked at in the long term, but certainly cannot just be looked at episode by episode. But on the question, I mean, we had an Executive Council meeting on Friday. Not that we needed the pressure from underneath, from the officials and members underneath. We didn't need it, but we got it. And the Executive Council agreed a statement utterly condemning the actions taken at that time against Sam Tarry, and the expectation, and it was worded in such a way, and the expectation there's going to be more heads to fall as well. And it's absolutely appalling. We expect the NEC, we expect all the trade unions on the NEC to put aside, let's call it nuanced political difference, and actually stand up and stand together on the issue of support by Labour politicians for trade unions, and in particular for trade union members that are losing money whilst on strike, not just for pay, because let's not forget the RMT is also about protecting public service in the form, for example, of the protection of the of those who work in the ticket offices, which perform a primary task to assist tourists, people less able, the disabled. It's both a public safety strike as well as a pay strike, and the trade union movement does need to join together to send a clear message to Starmer that the Labour Party cannot return to the rejected model that was eventually rejected in 2010 of a Tory light Labour Party, because the lesson is, given a choice between a Tory light Labour Party and a Tory party, sad as it is to say, the public go for the real thing, and we do not want to see the return of a return at the next election of a Tory government. We've had enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The Tory light thing. I mean, there's no. It doesn't seem that it's the Labour Party. I mean, it's not the party that I joined. What's being said by Starmer doesn't seem to represent what I thought the Labour Party was about. And it won't be long before there'll be even more unions disaffiliating if he continues. Do you think that's the case?
It's not for me to speak, and genuinely, I'm not in a position, not just in terms of protocol, to speak for other unions, but I really don't know. I mean, we have seen disaffiliation moves, the Bakers and so on. I'll be frank, the position of our Executive Council, and certainly my position and the General Secretary's, is that there shouldn't be disaffiliation, because we've got to fight to ensure that we have got a fighting Labour Party. That is a hard job, undoubtedly, but there is no quick or easy fix by disaffiliation. Is that clearly we have to work within, as simple as that. We have to work within.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Can we also send our regards to Matt Rack? I believe he's not well at the moment. I'm sure everyone shows solidarity with Matt. Thank you so much for coming on, Andy.
And really, really grateful for those comments. I know that Matt will be, and I know the Executive Council will very much appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Now, Our next speaker is from the Unison, who is the president of Unison. It's Paul Holmes. Paul, are you there?
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. The Unison is one. I mean, we've had Unite already saying, someone from Unite's been saying that there's a real problem with the Labour Party. Do you think Unison's going in that direction as well, with having reservations about supporting Labour?
I was the president last year. The situation I think is the most dire it's been in my 43 years in the Labour Party. There's no doubt about that. And I keep going back to that quote. I think it was from Andrew Bonar Law, the Tory Prime Minister before the First World War. A Tory MP said to him, "Do you think there really is such a thing as a class war?" And he says, "Well, there is, and there's a fight taking place, but there's only one side fighting." And I think that's where we are at this moment in time. If you speak to ordinary working people, and I've been a trade union member 48 years, I have never known them discuss trade union issues as much as they do at the moment in 48 years. And the reason is they're really, really suffering. And that picket line is a line that says, I don't want to be on a food bank. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to be low paid. And if you don't stand on that line, then you're not supporting the people on that line. It's as clear as that. And I think for people who join the Labour Party, perhaps who haven't been in a union, sometimes you get a bit confused. I'm absolutely clear, and I bet everybody on this call is, if you're in the Labour Party and you're a member of a trade union, your trade union comes first. You're a trade unionist who's in the Labour Party. You can't be in the Labour Party and not be a trade unionist. And part of being a trade unionist is standing on that line and saying which side of the line you're on. And if you're not on one side of the line, be on the other.
The fact that Sam Tarry was sacked for it seemed to be electorally to advantage Starmer to sack him. Do you think Starmer's sort of living in the wrong decade? I mean, like you say, that at the moment the zeitgeist is all about union activity and taking on people the bosses that are taking the mickey. Whereas Starmer seems to be thinking we're in 1997 or something, doesn't he?
You couldn't be more right. The fact of the matter is that those who run this country know the Tories are going to lose the next general election, and they're lining up the behaviour of who's going to take the place. And I know what this lot are like that run this country. Their attitude is, we want to control both parties. That's what they want to do. And they were terrified by Corbyn's election, and they don't want that repeating. They don't want it repeating. And it won't be repeated if this carries on, because A, I think for the first time in my lifetime, the future of the Labour Party is at stake. But B, you can't win a general election saying I'm not taking part in the fight. It doesn't happen. When we won in 74, we made a clear decision that we're supporting the NUM. We made a clear decision. That's what we were doing. And we have to make a clear decision in this country that we're supporting those people who are frightened of food banks and frightened of poverty and frightened of fuel poverty. Let's come forward with some positive proposals, because we could be in government sooner than we think. I mean, a lot of people don't agree with this, but I think if you had an election in the Labour Party and the Tory Party among the memberships, Johnson and Corbyn would win again. They both would, because there's such a vacuum in there of ideas.
So yeah, we're in a position where we've got the toughest situation facing normal people, but working people for my lifetime. I think it's worse than the 70s. Do you think?
It's definitely worse than the 70s. In the 70s, we were faced with the deindustrialisation of Britain, and to do that, they had to attack the unions. Now they're determined to make people poor. There are people starving in this country. You would not have believed that possible in the 70s. In the 70s, we were talking about what would you be doing for a living, job security, were we going to carry on as an industrial nation? We're talking about returning to the 1920s. We're talking about stories that I've only heard my grandparents talk about You know, we're seeing people in Britain now renting, never mind televisions, renting fridges and settees. People would have laughed at you on that in the 50s. They would have said, that's the thing of the past. But people can't afford to do anything. I know people on meters who can tell you how much a cup of coffee costs to boil the kettle. They can tell you it's 9p. Who were thinking about that 50 years ago? We were talking about a 25-hour week then. And the Tories are laughing at us. They're laughing at us. And one of the ways to try and control us is by controlling the people who lead us. And we've got to say to the people who lead us, we're not going to live like this. Mick Lynch couldn't be right. And the only criticism I've got of people who talk about Mick Lynch is there are dozens of Mick and Michelle Lynches about. They just need it getting an airtime like you'll give them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've got the media are just ignoring the situation we're facing that you say is almost like the 1920s, making out that Sunak and Truss is the story. And then we've got the Labour leadership ignoring it as well. So it's like they've put a wall up to stop anyone actually getting to the issue. Yet there's a little bit of light coming through with Mick Lynch and the other unions who are taking action. Can I just ask you to finish? What do you think about Unison's response? Has Unison made an official?
Oh, Unison's made a really clear response through its Labour link that, you know, our position is that we don't expect people to cross picket lines, and we expect people to respect picket lines and to support picket lines. And our representatives who we support should be able to do that. And I slightly disagree with what you said about the media. If you read the Financial Times, the biggest story in the Financial Times yesterday was the vote by the Felixstowe dockers to come on strike, where there's 40% of containers in Britain go through Felixstowe. They're terrified. They're just not letting on they're terrified.
Right. All right. Well, I better up my game and start reading the Financial Times. Thank you, Paul.
The rich read it.
Good to see you. Now, I'm going to move on to David McMullen from the GMB. I'm not sure if, David, you're not speaking officially from the GMB, but you are an officer, is that right, of the GMB?
Yeah, I'm assistant regional organizer for GMB, and yeah, I'm speaking in my personal capacity after being told off for posting a resignation letter to Labour in the week. It's probably more sensible for me to speak in my personal capacity, I think.
So you've what's happened since Sam Tarry got sacked from as a minister, the shadow minister? What you've resigned from? What, the GMB or the Labour Party? What?
I mean, the background, I've been a member right back to 2008. I resigned over the criticism of the tearing down of the Edward Coulson statue, if you remember, in Bristol.
Right.
Because really, you know, is built on a certain number of pillars. You know, being anti-discrimination should be one of those pillars. You know, fighting for the working class should be another one of those pillars. And I just feel that the Labour Party has unfortunately lost its way. So even though I sat on the South East Regional Board as a GMB delegate and was involved with campaigning with some other groups within Labour, I resigned on Tuesday because it's no longer a party that I recognise as fighting for workers.
And what do you think about the GMB position generally? Because the GMB is often seen as one of the main supporters of Starmer. Do you think that the GMB support for Starmer's weakening a little bit after this?
I mean, our General Secretary has been very clear. If you look at his Twitter, Gary Smith, you know, we completely 100% stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the transport unions. And as he rightly said in the week, Labour have scored a massive own goal because what we've done is detract from what is a Tory crisis and directed the media into Labour.
Yes, I mean, GMB, Unison, we just heard from Paul Holmes. I mean, these are kind of regarded as quite supportive of Keir Starmer. Do you get the feeling? Because I get the feeling that lots of this kind of what you call I hate saying these terms, something like the soft left. Do you think the soft left are starting to question Starmer as much as hard left people like me?
I think the unions will very often be supportive of the Labour as a natural thing. you know, at some point we need to work alongside them to try and get better rights for our employee, you know, and our members and things like that. But I think there is a change of mood. You know, we are fighting so hard now for our members who aren't, you know, going on strike for ideological reasons. They're going on strike because they can't afford to put food on the table for their children. It's also, to be honest, which we haven't touched upon today, having a massive impact on membership. You know, I quite often ring members that have left the union, and the most common thing now is, you know, I want to stay in the union, but I'm bored. And if it's choosing whether to put food on the table for my children or staying in the union, I'm having to leave the union. So I think that's also the pennies dropping for unions from that respect as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I know you do lots for, not only you've been doing lots for the GMB and for everyone. I mean, you were at Toll Puddle as well. It's great help to us there. Thanks. And driving the stage truck. I mean, who can forget that? Thank you. Thank you, David. I know you're probably busy doing something else now. You look like you're out there doing something. Cheers. Now I want to show the results of the graphs, the survey that we put out to subscribers. Now I've been able to filter these results in a couple of ways, and the first one is quite interesting. This one is, these are only trade union members who are part subscribed. There's 629 trade union members, and they were asked, has Sam Tarry's sacking made you more or less likely to vote Labour? Only 2% were more likely to vote Labour, while 59% are less likely to vote Labour. We've also got this question to trade union members. Do you think trade unions should consider disaffiliating from the Labour Party on the back of Sam Tarry's sacking? Yes, 69%, no, 19%. So it's clear trade union members have been affected by what's happened in the past few days. And then if we look at the Labour Party members, which are filtered in, these are just members of the Labour Party, not expelled, not resigned, not left. Do you think that it's 508 Labour members of our subscribers here? Do you think it was right for Keir Starmer to sack Sam Tarry? No, 82%. So Labour members are clearly not in support of Starmer on this, even the ones that are just left, and there's lots who've been expelled. So or suspended or left. And then do you think Labour distancing itself from trade unions makes the party more electable? This is Labour members as well. Only 8% think that what Starmer's doing by not associating himself with unions makes him more electable. So clearly Labour members are not in support of what Keir Starmer's doing. I'd like to speak to Bonnie if she's there in down there in South London. Would you call it, Bonnie?
Yeah, South London.
South London. Now you work for the TSSA, who are another affiliated union. Obviously, you're not speaking for them, you're speaking in a personal capacity. What do you think about what you've heard about the other unions? They just don't seem at all keen on what Starmer's doing. And if you've seen from that survey, most of the people on this show who are union members don't think Starmer's going about it the right way, and they're less likely to vote Labour. I mean, is this a disaster for Labour, do you think?
It's an enormous tactical error. At the end of the day, there are millions and millions of trade union members, mostly ordinary people, and they are the bedrock of the people that the Labour Party needs to get out and vote for them. I'm pretty tired of this chasing Tory voters and forgetting about the Labour voters, because we need to remember that the Labour Party was founded by the trade unions so that we had a voice in Parliament, and turning the backs and kicking down on ordinary people's rights to withdraw their labour, which actually is a fundamental human right and isn't something anyone does lightly, because it means forgoing at least a day's pay. You know, when money's tight, it's a really tough call to make for people to forego a day's wages. And really the party that was founded to support the voices of ordinary people ought to be in our corner, really. I mean, what we saw in Sam Tarry used to work at TSSA. He was one of my colleagues for years. And unusually, he is someone in the cabinet or the shadow cabinet who actually has an understanding of the industry that he's supposed to be speaking about. I mean, look at Wes Streeting. Has he ever been a nurse? I don't think so. Look at all the education ministers we've ever had in any party. Very few of them have had anything at all to do with education, whereas it makes perfect sense for someone like Sam to be in the transport group in the shadow parliament, shadow cabinet. And sacking him was utterly wrong. Now, the way I see it, Sam was sacked for standing with working people on a shared TSSA and RMT picket line. You know, having come from the TSSA, of course he wants to support the members of the TSSA who are fighting not only for their money, but for job security and for safety on the railway, which is absolutely critical in this dispute. The stories initially came out he was sacked for standing with them on the picket line, because we remember they were all threatened about standing on picket lines, and brilliantly, since he was sacked, we've seen more and more MPs going out and joining us on picket lines, which is, you know, a real show of defiance, and I think it's fantastic. But to me, when they said actually he was sacked for making up policy on the hoof, now that shows three things. The first one shows that there is a distinct lack of policy that's declared by the party. Number two, when Starmer was elected to be leader of the Labour Party, he pledged, one of his 10 pledges, remember them, was that he was going to stand by the policies that the membership of the Labour Party helped create. And one of those pledges was to also support working people and trade unions. So it shows that he's not honouring that one either. By the way, Sam didn't make up policy on the hoof. He reiterated manifesto pledges that were in those last two manifestos that Starmer said he was going to support. The third thing is obviously the history of the Labour Party. And if it will not support ordinary people forced to withhold their labour, forced to go without pay when people are desperate and people are struggling to feed their families and keep the electric on, you know, people are, as Paul was talking earlier, people in food banks are refusing certain types of food because they can't afford to heat them up. We're looking at food that's cold that people don't have to prepare, and food that doesn't need to be kept in a fridge because people can't afford the electricity to run that fridge. So if ordinary people are facing those challenges, membership of trade union obviously is more money going out. But if we don't use that and people don't forego a little bit more money, and we're talking about working people in direct destitution, actually, we're not even talking poverty anymore. If people can't do that and have the expect the support of the Labour Party in those battles, then what really is the point in the Labour Party? I'm a member of the Labour Party, but I'm also a trade unionist, and as was said before, now my focus is on trade unionism. I used to dedicate a heck of a lot of time to the Labour Party, but now, you know, the battleground's shifted. If they're not with us, they're working against us, and the actions of Starmer recently is very clearly working against us. And I think one of the things that we saw from Jeremy's leadership was we saw all that hope, all that energy and all that enthusiasm, and actually ordinary people started to see that we can expect better and that we deserve better than what we're being given. And I honestly don't think that without that period when Jeremy was leader, you know, whatever you think of it, it's actually made people feel a lot more confident about standing up for what they deserve and what is right. And so this current wave of strikes, obviously we've got TSSA, RMT and Aslef striking. We've also got CWU, FBU are thinking about it. Royal College of Midwives are about to ballot. Royal College of Nurses are about to ballot. The BMA are talking of balloting. The police in Scotland have balloted for action short of strike, which is actually the first time they've done that. The police are not allowed to take industrial action, but they are taking action short of strike, which is absolutely astounding. All the education unions are preparing to ballot over the summer. You know, we are seeing a wave of industrial unrest because people are actually saying we cannot afford to carry on as we are. And if the Labour Party was serious about winning elections and winning votes, they'd be supporting us, because someone said, who was it, Crispin, that we are the many and they're the few. And if they want votes from the many, they need to start speaking for the many, as far as I'm concerned. And as for all the talk of the workers demanding salary that they can afford to feed themselves, pushing inflation, absolute balderdash. What is pushing inflation is the fact that this government, this Tory government, let's not forget, these are the true bad guys. This Tory government removed the energy price cap because energy companies, some of them were going into bankruptcy and administration. So they removed the price cap, and it is the massive galloping profits of the energy companies and the prices that they're charging you, me, everyone else in this call, is pushing inflation, because it's not only our bills that goes up, it's every supermarket that has to transport goods are paying more for diesel, every office that has to turn the lights on is paying more for the energy. Every single thing we do is costing more, because the government have said it's a free-for-all for the energy companies. They can attack us as much as they like, because they've got to keep their shareholders happy and comfortable, and it doesn't matter what's happening to us. So let's turn that narrative on its head and start getting a fair deal for ordinary people.
Well, that's great. Coming from a personal capacity, fantastic. And thank you, Bonnie. I'm just
Listen, just one more thing, actually. Can I say, I am speaking in a personal capacity, but I would like to highlight what the General Secretary of TSSA said this morning in a Facebook post. He said, Starmer has created his own quicksand. No ifs, no buts. Support the workers fighting for their livelihoods. And I think that's a really important message. So I just wanted to get that out there as well.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Cheers.
Thanks.
Now I'm going to move on to Mick Whelan's on the call from Aslef, who's been very busy. Appreciate you having any time for this show, Mick. How many appearances have you been on the media in the past couple of days? You must have had hundreds.
I lost count, unfortunately, but it's much a greater pleasure to talk to my own. Thank you.
Well, we're not going to give you a tough time like they do. All their boring questions about, I don't know what they're going about. But anyway, how was the strike yesterday? Can you update us on that?
Massively solid, and also a massive amount of support from other workers and other areas, which is nice to see the movement coming together in solidarity. I think, as Bonnie's just said, and I'd like to say hello to my friend Bonnie, she said an awful lot of things I'd like to articulate myself. This is a time, when work isn't paying for many people, when many people claiming benefits, there's one or two people in a household not working, right? We have to understand that politically, we have to be up there standing with those. And isn't every one of those people a voter? If we truly want to get into power and we truly want to change the face of politics in the UK, quite simply, we want everybody to feel part of that. They're going to be part of the future. Their children are going to be part of the future. Their grandchildren are going to be part of the future. This idea that we have to accept in-work poverty or out-of-work poverty, and we can't grow our way out of this current crisis, terrifies me.
And this wave of union sort of activity and fight against these bosses who are trying to impose ridiculous wages and conditions that are just not sustainable for the workers. I mean, this is not being helped by the Labour Party at the moment. Do you think Keir Starmer's got to change tack?
I think I'd like to see Keir more overtly out there supporting the members and what we're used to, and supporting the workers. We are the party of the workers. We're the party founded by the workers. And if we aren't going to recognise the people that go out there and bang on the doors and do the leafleting on behalf of people in the areas and the core people who do what the Labour Party needs it to do, we don't recognise the ethics and morals and what we were set up to do, we're going to be in a real problem. I think we're seeing is what John Smith said in 1993. We'll have a Tory party that falls back on wage cuts and attacking trade union rights to defend itself. And unless we reverse that, unless the party stands up to protect those trade union rights and protect workers, then we are not going to get into power as we need to do to change the world. Now, no, I do know that the Labour Party is talking about growth. But it's quite simple. You saw Gordon Brown just at the time of the last bankers crisis was when we paid off Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease was a bigger debt over 60 years than any debt this country's ever had. Yet throughout that period of Lend-Lease, we built millions of homes. We created the NHS. We changed society in a post-world consensus that we need to do again. And also we should be parking our tanks on their lawn. They portray themselves as economically adept, and they're going to hide behind Brexit, and they're going to hide behind the pandemic. But in the 10 years before the pandemic, this Tory government had borrowed more money than any other government in history, yet cut services and council funding by 60%. You don't grow an economy by cutting investment. You grow an economy by investing in your public services, investing in people, investing in those communities, and giving them the wherewithal then, with their disposable income, to then grow other businesses and other opportunities for other people. We are not surprised that we're in the position that we're in as a nation this moment in time, because it's been about the 1% and profiteering. And the one point I want to make, which many other trade union leaders have made, and I think Body may have made their contribution, so I apologise for repeating something. Inflation is not being driven by wages. Inflation's being driven by capitalist profiteering. Profits have gone up for most companies by 73%. The people in those companies are not seeing that reciprocated in their disposable income or their wages. And if, right, we don't deal with the profiteering, right, people have got a right in the cost of living crisis to demand the wages that allow them at least to stand still, but hopefully to drive them forward.
Now, just one more question for you, Mick. I keep seeing, I mean, I'm watching a lot of discussion shows, and I've seen you on the telly a few times, and this idea that trade unions will never be popular have never been popular since the 1970s, as if it's the public are against trade unions. This is kind of going around the media as a truism. But don't you think that the whole system has been discredited so much with all these companies earning obscene amounts of money that tide has turned now?
Oh, massively. Look, what we get is, and particularly in my trade union, is we saw them sitting out their stall 5 or 6 months ago before we were even planning any strikes, about the politics of envy, about putting worker against worker. And we see an awful lot of, I answer an awful lot of correspondence about, well, my son and my daughter, they won't be allowed them to be in a trade union, they only get this. And we say, join a trade union and we'll work with you and for you to get you what you need to be. And also, strangely enough, in the past, when there's been rail strikes, you know, the general public, because it affects them directly in the high cost of travel, we get an awful lot of brickbats, we get an awful lot thrown at us. We're seeing it different this time. People are now seeing it as workers standing up for themselves because they understand in their own families and in their own communities the impact of what this government is doing and what is needed. So strangely enough, people keep coming about a summer of discontent. Unless this government comes forward, unless we stand up for people, I think it'll be a lot longer than a summer of discontent.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, doing another interview. I hope you have a good Sunday break from all this.
Thank you, Crispin. Look after yourself, mate.
Cheers, mate. Now, I'm going to take some hands up from Labour members, and then I've got to move on because Ben's got an important announcement to make. I'm really only looking for members. If you've been expelled, Graham, sorry, or Terry, but I'm looking to speak to the members because I want to hear the voices of Labour members. That's really what do Labour members think about what happened with Sam Tarry. Diana Neslen is still a Labour member, and in fact, well, and you're in Sam Tarry's constituency.
I'm in Sam's constituency, so I believe I have a right to talk. And I'm actually quite proud of my MP, because I know John says, well, it's a bit late, but I say it's better late than never. And I'm really glad, but there are a couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, the thing I wanted to say is the appetite grows on what it feeds. And I think Starmer was lulled in a false sense of security by the ease with which he dispatched so many people, by the prescription of good socialist organizations and the people in them. And I have to say this, the trade union representatives, both at conference and on the NEC, did not challenge Starmer at the time. We could see the direction he was going, and he needed to be challenged then. But again, as I say, better late than never. At least at this stage, they've come on board and they are providing the leadership that we aren't getting from the Labour Party. Now, what I wanted to say and what hasn't been said yet is that before Sam went on the picket line, we had a trigger ballot in this borough. And the trigger ballot was, we found, really quite fraudulent. It was very nasty. It was a nasty trigger ballot. And Sam lost out. Now, we know that there were a number of issues around this. I can go into detail if people want to. But more importantly, when he showed the fraud to the Labour Party, they said, yeah, we realise there's fraud, but we just want to go. Yes, sorry about that.
It's all right.
Yeah, we realise there's fraud, but the trigger stands. And that really is the spirit of the Labour Party. And so the rest of us will be working hard to support Sam when he stands again. I'm hoping that what's happened will make a big difference. But in terms
do you think Sam Tarry's got a bigger name now and he might get more support in the local party?
I'm hoping so. The thing is, he's got really big publicity, and the fact is that he stood out and he stood for something. And too often, with too many people in the too many MPs, they haven't stood for anything. They've hidden behind Starmer and his lack of any values, his lack of any commitment to any Labour values, to any socialism. And I think if Sam has shown that he has the guts to stand up, it might help in his in the selection ballot.